Hello, I'm Stephen Leake, and I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church in Mesquite, Texas. And I'm also the teacher of the Discipleship Sunday School class there. And today we're continuing with our study of the book, The Gospel of John. Now, last week I told you that the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John read like a mini New Testament. And so we would be going through them verse by verse, maybe even sometimes word by word. Last week we did verses 1 and 2, and this week we're going to do verses 3 and 4. So let's get started. John 1 verse 3. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. It may seem strange to us that John stresses the way in which the world was created. And it also seems strange that he would connect Jesus with the work of creation. But he had to do this because of a certain tendency of thought in his day. In the time of John, there was a kind of heresy called Gnosticism. Its characteristic was that it was an intellectual and philosophical approach to Christianity. To the Gnostics, the simple beliefs of the ordinary Christian were not enough. They tried to construct a philosophic system out of Christianity. They were troubled by the existence of sin and evil and of sorrow and suffering in the world, so they worked out a theory to explain it. In the beginning, two things existed. One was God, and the other was matter. Matter was always there and was the raw material out of which the world was made. The Gnostics held that this original matter was flawed and imperfect. In other words, the world got off to a bad start. It was made out of material which had in it the seeds of corruption. The Gnostics went even further. God, they said, is pure spirit, and pure spirit can never touch matter. Therefore, it was not permissible for God to carry out the work of creation. So he put out from himself a series of emanations. Each emanation was further and further away from God. And as the emanations got further and further away, they knew less and less about God. Soon there were emanations which knew nothing of God, and finally the emanations began to be hostile toward God. Finally, an emanation totally ignorant of God and totally hostile toward him created the world. The Gnostics took this one step further. They identified the creator emanation with the God of the Old Testament. And they held that this God was different from, ignorant of, and hostile toward the God and Father of Jesus Christ. In the time of John, this kind of belief was widespread. It was believed that the world was evil and that an evil God had created it. To combat this belief, John lays down two very basic Christian beliefs. First, Christianity has always believed in what is called creation out of nothing. We do not believe that God had to work with evil matter when he created the world. We do not believe that the world began with an essential flaw. Christians believe that God is there behind everything. Secondly, Christianity has always believed that this is God's world. God is intimately involved in the world, not detached from it. The Gnostics tried to place the blame for evil on the shoulders of its creator. But Christians believe that human sin is responsible for what is wrong in this world. So even though sin has injured the world and kept it from being what God wanted it to be, Christians do not despair. We believe that the world is essentially God's, and that gives us a new sense of the value of the world and a new sense of responsibility toward it. Now, when my father was dying, he asked me to help with his memorial service. But he didn't need my help. He had everything planned and written down. I suppose he just wanted me to ensure that nothing got changed after he was gone. One of the verses he picked for his graveside service was Psalm 24:1. Well, I read it with him. He had a Xerox copy out of some version of the Bible I wasn't familiar with. And I said, Dad, why do you want this to be a part of your service? He said, Son, I don't know, but it must have meant something to me at one time, so just leave it in there. Now, Psalm 24:1, now I'm reading from the King James Version right here, goes like this. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. That verse has since become my favorite Old Testament verse. Like John 1:3, it gives me a new sense of the value to the world and a new sense of my responsibility toward it. Verse 4, in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. Here John begins by stating the themes he is going to elaborate in the course of this great work. Light and life are two great basic words on which the fourth gospel is built. And they're the two main themes developed in the Gospel of John. The fourth gospel begins and ends with life. At the very beginning, we read that in Jesus was life. And at the very end, we read that John's aim in writing the gospel was that everyone might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and through believing, we might have life. And the word is continually on the lips of Jesus. In one of my favorite verses, Jesus states that he came so that we might have life and life abundant. That's John 10:10. And in one of John's great metaphors, Jesus proclaims that he is the way, the truth, and the life. That's John 14, verse 6. In John, the word life occurs more than 35 times, and the verb to live more than 15 times. What then does John mean by life? Quite simply, life is the opposite of destruction, condemnation, and death. God sent his Son so that everyone who believes should not perish, but have eternal life. That's the verse we all learned when we were in Sunday school, and it still has great meaning for us today. In Jesus, there is security in this life and in the life to come. Those who live without Christ simply exist. They do not know what life is. Jesus is the one person who can make life worth living, and in whose company death is only the prelude to a fuller life. But John is quite clear that while Jesus is the bringer of life, the giver of life is God. Again and again, John uses the phrase, the living God. The Christian Creator God is behind everything. But we must, however, ask, what is life? What does John mean by life? And again, the fourth gospel uses the phrase eternal life. Now, we'll discuss the full meaning of this phrase later on in the Sunday school lesson. But for now, eternal life is not life which lasts forever, as that would be a terrible curse. We've all known those so ill and tired that they prayed for release from this life. In eternal life, there must be more than duration of life. There must be quality of life. Life is not desirable unless it's a certain kind of life. Only God is eternal. Therefore, eternal life is the life which God lives. So eternal life is a life which knows something of the serenity and power of God himself. When Jesus came offering men and women eternal life, he was inviting them to enter into the life of God, the Father. How then do we enter into it? Well, we enter into it by believing in Jesus Christ. The word believe occurs in the 4th chapter no fewer than 70 times. What does John mean by believe? First, he means that we must be convinced that Jesus is really and truly the Son of God. We must learn about him and study his words and deeds until we are convinced that he is the Son of God. When we do that, we stop existing and begin living. The second of John's great words in this verse is light. This word occurs in the 4th chapter no fewer than 21 times. Jesus was the light of all people. The light Jesus brings is the light which eliminates chaos. In the creation story, God moved upon the dark and said, "Let there be light." His newly created light routed the empty chaos. Likewise, Jesus is the light which shines in darkness and keeps our lives from chaos. The light which Jesus brings is a revealing light. It shows us things as they are. We never see ourselves so clearly until we see ourselves through the eyes of Jesus. And the light of Jesus is also a guiding light. If people do not possess that light, they walk in darkness and do not know where they are going. When we receive the light, we cease to walk in darkness. Over and over again, we read stories in the Gospels of people coming to Jesus and asking, "What should I do?" When Jesus comes into a life, the time of guessing and of groping is ended, and the time of doubt and uncertainty is gone. The path that was dark becomes light. The decision that was wrapped in uncertainty is illuminated. Now, when my son Andy and I were in an accounting firm together, we often encountered problems and challenges dealing with people and the tax law, as you might well imagine. But we ultimately came to the conclusion that the solution to any problem was in Matthew 7:12. Just treat others as you would like to be treated. Without Jesus, we stumble in the darkness. With Jesus, the way is clear. Thank you and goodbye for this lesson. Next week, we'll start with chapter 1, verse 5. God bless.